Jesus Christ, dude. Mate, this is why we should ban advertising so people can't buy scary stuff like that. Jeez, are you gonna are you aware of that the entire time?
No. It is a beautiful look, though. It matches my.
Oh
matches
man!
my.
Oh, it actually, you could put it back on. I think this is worse.
What's rude?
Sorry, man. All right. Let's start. So I'll affirm that we should ban all advertising. So I'll make three main arguments in this debate. Firstly, that advertising in and of itself is unjust and thus we should not allow it. Secondly, that advertising is bad for consumers. And thirdly, that in a world without advertising would be superior for businesses. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is just briefly what a world without advertising would likely look like. So instead of the like bright flashing lights in music and catalogs we'd see right now, you would still be able to show people you're selling something. So you'd be able to say, look, I'm selling this lounge, but it would have to be just a simple picture with just a strict description of what that product is. It can't have any like testimonials. It can't have any emotive statements or music or anything like that. So it's just a description of what it is, not advertising what it is. So first argument, why it's, and this obviously applies to like political parties as well. So firstly, why this is unjust. The reason why advertising is unjust on a principled level is that in order to make you buy something, it has to make you desire that thing. And the property of feeling like that you're desiring something is such that you need it, that you are unwhole without it. So it actually makes people feel worse and makes people feel terrible. And that the only way that they can feel better is by buying that thing. What are the problems with that? One, I think it's unjust just in general to make people feel bad. Two, in order to buy that thing, it's highly unlikely that the purchase of that is likely to make someone feel better. And two reasons for that. The first reason is that obviously there are other bombarding advertisements that tell you you're still going to be unhappy. And secondly, buying a car or buying a house or buying like the new iPad is not something that will inherently make you happy. It's just a claim that the advertising is making. The third problem with this is that it puts you into a cycle where you have to continue buying things. And often if you're unable to buy that thing, for example, because of your economic situation, you're likely to feel significantly worse than you should otherwise. Those are reasons why it's unjust. The second reason why it's unjust is that you often don't consent to the advertising. That is to say that it often occurs in public spaces or targeted directly at you. For example, your Facebook feed targets you with advertising that because of your metadata, which is also something you don't consent to giving away, they will sell things to you in that regard. So as a function of that, it means that people don't consent to the things that are being sold to them. So not only do they not need the thing to begin with, they are not consenting to the process which makes them feel like they need to, that they want to need it. That seems pretty cooked to me. And also it also uses things like emotional manipulation with children, or like, for example, for insurance, or like funeral insurance. It makes people buy, expend exorbitant amounts of things that they don't need. Other socially constructed things like Christmas, which say you need to buy presents for people around Christmas time, artificially jack up their prices so that people feel like they have to spend that amount of money if they want to be a good person. That's something that's unjust. Thirdly, often the advertising is particularly misleading, which means, and there's lots of reasons for this. Firstly, there is so much advertising every day with the amount of businesses that there are. It's almost impossible to regulate it within a set standard. If you ban it, you remove that problem. Secondly, the advertisers have an incentive to lie about the things that they're selling in order to make you buy it more. Because once you've made that purchase, it's really hard to return it on a subjective claim of, oh, it didn't make me happy, because there's those are only implicit claims in the advertising. What's this one here I've written here? And fourthly, they often use stereotypes that are either racist or sexist, or they're, unfair to specific groups in society, which is something that we just should not support on a principled level. This obviously removes those things to the extent at which they exist. Those are the four broad reasons to believe why it's unjust. Secondly, second major argument, why it's bad for consumers. Firstly, often advertising does not lead to the best product. Because the best advertiser is the person who wins the sale of the product. It's not the best product that gets sold. That is to say, if you've got a larger advertising budget, yours is the product gets sold because more people know about it, more people think it's good, and thus more people buy it, which means that consumers aren't getting the best product. B, it creates a tragedy of the commons problem where people feel like instead of investing money into their product, they have to invest money into their advertising and marketing departments in order to be the one to sell their product, which means that there's an incentive fallacy that means people are going to suffer with regard to the quality of their product. C, it locks out people from that market. And what I mean by people is I mean by new businesses. If you can't afford to advertise your product to the nth degree like Coca-Cola or Pepsi do, it means that you can't offer it on the market because very few people know about it. That also has the associated harm of locking out and stifling innovation for new organizations that come up with new products, but no one hears about them. That makes it manifestly worse for consumers. Finally, finally, on why it hurts consumers. It just creates family situations which people suffer from. So I already spoke about things like socially constructed things like Christmas, where you feel obligated to buy things to the nth degree, which means that you're likely to suffer if you're unable to do so. But often advertising targeted at children is designed to make the children upset if they don't have it, to fight their parents and to say, you need to buy me this, otherwise I'm going to be upset and you're a bad parent. We think that if you have a system that is designed to make people feel bad and create family stress, that's a system that ought to be removed. Finally, on business, obviously it keeps businesses accountable in the sense that if they make claims about their product, it can't be washed away by a more persuasive advertising campaign. If you have on the system that I'm proposing just a strict description of the product you're buying and it does not meet that description, you can go very clearly to the business and say, these are the objective things you told me were going to be on here and they are not on here. That's easier under my side of the house because there's less emotional involvement. Secondly, it means that products are significantly better for all of the reasons I outlined before about the incentive problems that go away, but also because businesses now have superior information, because the people who are buying their product and repeatedly buying their products are the ones who think that the product was better, not because of an advertising campaign. This gives them the ability to determine between people who just bought things based on the advertising they saw versus how they enjoy their product. That's the case. Have a go.
All right. I'd like to thank you for this debate. And before I go into talking about your side of the argument, I want to roll into mine. So the first thing I want to do is I don't think we necessarily need a definition. And to the world without, I'll give it that. I think that if need be, we can push that burden a little bit higher on you, but I don't really want to do that. So
sorry, what's the burden you mean? Sorry.
So I mean, if wanted, some could push the burden like every statement of your business is an advertisement, right? So let's say I want to go to a grocery store. The fact that some grocery stores look better than others, that's a form of advertisement. We would have to, if pushing the burden away from this world, but I'm actually sticking to your world, would be that we would have to get rid of all of that as well.
I'm happy for that. No, I'm happy for that. Yeah, I'm totally happy for that. The building should be bland. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then obviously I think that there's an issue there that we can bring up. But anyway, so the first thing I want to do is I want to set up a frame for this debate for everyone watching and those judging. The frame for this debate is that subtraction from liberties are harmful to all. So when we ban something, there obviously has to be some type of liberty removed. So I want everyone to look at the idea that there is a liberty here being removed that not only affects sellers, but it also affects buyers. And this is harmful to all. Now, the first contention I have is that, one, it causes a loss of revenue because companies cannot reach out to consumers without advertising. Right? He brought up many ideas. So Facebook and Google using metadata to target you specifically as to what they think that you might want. If these companies do not have the ability to get out and target them, there's no way that they can make as much of a difference and as a big of an impact on the consumerism of that nation or world. My second contention, consumers lose in two respects. The first one, differentiation leads to socially optimal output, and this is directed by ads showing choices. So in your world, there has to be there is a harder mechanism to show what is and what is not, which is based off my first one, but it also shows that the product differentiation is much harder to get across as well. B, without ad data mining, companies have less information to use for price discrimination, which negatively affects the lower classes. This price discrimination mechanism that is used through these targeting and data mining companies allows them to say, hey, obviously this person that is going to be buying this is in a lower quintile. Therefore, we should use some level of price discrimination. That way, they are more likely to buy our product. So if you remove that, then you remove the ability for these companies to discriminate price-wise, which would invariably cause a price distortion, which is a net negative for society, but it mainly affects the lower class, which could be stated that it affects the minorities in the United States more specifically. And I think that is something that is more than to regret. I think that is something that must be kept in. My third contention, advertising tends to curb imperfect information. If products are being advertised, the companies themselves tend to show why their product is different. This elucidates some asymmetric information. And a lot of times we have third-party examination in advertisements is often used. So if we have all of these third parties, so this is a big, giant economic rotating system where we have third parties and these consulting and management agencies saying, wow, well, we need to push all of this advertisement out. And then you have other third-party companies saying, well, we'll be the guys to check on what product is actually good. In your world, both of those are lost. So that's a huge problem to the overall economy. The last thing I want to point out is that most of what Liam has stated here are things that we ought to regret. But I do not think that any of those are strong enough to make the statement that we should ban all advertisings. Because in my world, I can still have proper regulation that can deal with the problem of the unjustness, right? So sure, we can properly regulate whether or not a company can go out of its way to target you for something that you don't need. Two, consumers.
Whoa. Oh, sorry, just to interrupt. You realize that argument is directly in tension with the argument you just made. You say an argument can still you can make laws to say that advertisements can't be targeted, but your previous argument was to say that advertisements need to be targeted to give it to people who need it the most and to price discriminate.
Okay, so there's a reason why. So I'm talking about the unjustness. I do think that there is a just target and an unjust target. For instance, you brought up targeting of kids. I do think that, say, advertising for cigarettes that gets shown to children is obviously an unjust target. In my world, I can properly regulate against that. That doesn't mean all targeting is unjust. Just what is unjust can be dealt with from the regulation. Now, since unjust is obviously subjective, this will be up to possibly through a republic or some democratic legislation that leads to an overall good, and it's not just focus for the majority, not the minority. So then you stated that it doesn't give the best, that the problem with advertising is that it's not the best product that will be put out. Well, I actually disagree, because if your product is not good enough, you will not be able to have enough revenue to push into ads to gain an even larger market share. With that, I want to pass it back to Liam.
All right. Okay. So just noting then that the second half of my case didn't really get a response in that section. I'll firstly deal with the stuff that Joe said. His first claim is to say that there are liberties removed, and when liberties are removed, that's a bad thing. A couple of responses. One, I gave 4 liberties that are removed in the existence of advertising. 1, desire and to be happy. So the advertising makes you unhappy. You have a liberty to be happy. That's unfair, that this is an unjust imposition on you. Joe can't regulate that away because that's the reason for advertising. It has to make you want something in order to buy that thing. So that's not something he can regulate because that's inherent to advertising. The second liberty I talk about was consent. Again, he cannot regulate this away because one, that would mean no public advertising, which is something that he supported. And secondly, he tried to differentiate and say, well, there are just targets like adults and unjust targets like children. But importantly, that's not my argument. My argument is consent. The adult does not consent to being targeted. The child does not consent to being targeted. That thing doesn't change. You can't regulate it away. The third liberty that I spoke about, which receives no response, is that often these are misleading. That is to say, they have an incentive to do something that lies about the product to make people wanting to buy it. Importantly, Joe also can't regulate this away, as I told you in my first speech. And the reason for that is that there are so many advertisements every day. It's literally impossible to look at all of them and vet all of them. This just means that you should ban them entirely such that those things don't happen. The fourth liberty I spoke about, which didn't hear a response, is to say that often advertising requires stereotypes and relies on people's preconceived notions of what other people should be acting upon. That doesn't hear a response and can't be regulated away because it's something that's embedded in society. Importantly, he said that they're unjust and regrettable. That doesn't mean we shouldn't remove them. Absolutely it does, for all the reasons I spoke about of how harmful those things were in the second half of my speech. He's the one who's not giving you a mechanism to weigh up those things. The next thing he tells us is that he can still do targeting is required. The first thing is to say is that obviously that makes people desire it. That desire is unjust and is less likely to happen on my side of the house. Secondly, if people needed a product so bad, you know what they would do? They would go and buy the product without being told to buy it. They could flip through the catalog, identify that as something that they needed, and then choose to do that instead of being told that they need it. Mine's the side of the house that gives more agency to people who are consumers. The next thing he tells us is you need to say, well, it makes differentiation between businesses harder. Nope, it actually makes it easier because now you don't just rely on your excellent marketing budget to say how, excellent your product is. Coca-Cola's full of happiness and bullshit like that. They have to very clearly and objectively say, what is the difference between Coke and Pepsi and why should I buy Coke over Pepsi rather than just emotional appeals of people smiling in the sunlight, which, subconsciously makes people want to buy it, but actually doesn't give you any information about the product itself. The next thing he tells you is that information asymmetry is important. Look, you can do that on my side as well. People who are buying products, the company will have information on who bought the product, but now it's not poisoned by the existence of advertising. There are people who will buy a product because they are forced into it because of advertising, and there were people who will buy a product because they actually needed that product. You can't tell the difference between those two consumers under Joe's side of the house. Under my side of the house, everyone who buys a product wanted to buy that product before they were forced into doing so by a coercive advertisement system. This means that there's actually even greater information under my side of the house because it's not corrupted by that advertisement. Finally, he tells us that price distortion is important for businesses to be able to do. I think he's talking about like shopping centers there because he's talking about like low SES environments, and it means that people should be able to, change their prices for the people buying it. Firstly, I don't know what it's like in America, but in Australia, supermarkets in low SES environments actually are more expensive than those in high SES environments. But even if that's not the case, like that's just an observation. A shopping center can still modulate its prices because it knows the area of which it is in. It knows its target demographic. If you've got something that's unsegmented in market-wise, for example, a shopping center's unsegmented, then you can just do it by the demographic of the geography you're in. You don't have to advertise to people explicitly. The final thing he says, which is the only response I get to my practical outcomes, is to say, well, look, if the product is not good, people won't buy it, and therefore they won't have enough money to, continue advertising. Then the question is why do people continually buy Apple when it's strictly a worse product? It has a lower shelf life. You can't exchange batteries. You can't exchange data. You can't exchange memory cards. Like, A Samsung is a strictly better phone in almost all regards. The reason why people buy Apple is because of the advertisement around it, because it's seen as a premium product, even though the product specifications don't lend it to being a premium product. That is something that stops under mice out of the house. So actually, it's a fallacy for Joe to say just because the product is good or bad means that there will be more money. No. It's the people persuaded to buy the product, and more people are persuaded with advertising.
Okay, so I'm going to run down that. Okay, so yes, there is liberty that is removed from taking away these ads. I think we both agree with that. You're saying that these liberties, you're saying that the liberties that are being removed by advertising are greater than the liberties that are going to be removed by banning advertising. That I must disagree. All right, so the first thing, let's talk about the consent argument, that we do not consent. So first and foremost, this is all advertisement. So when these companies target this data mining, you do consent, whether you agree with that statement or not. You consent. The moment you get on the internet and go onto Google, you consent. The moment you allow your computer to allow cookies, you consent. If you do not want this targeted advertising directed at you, then don't get on the computer. Obviously, there's some trade-off there, but it's one that is still a choice, one that may be minorly coercive, but it's no worse. And secondly, if you're going out in public and you're bombarded by all of this advertising, think of how bland and unbeautiful the world would be if you removed that. A lot of the utility here is gained through beauty. And beauty is a utility, and it's something that we should look forward to and see when we go out throughout our day in public. Or else we'll be stuck looking at people like me and Liam, and that's just not fun.
I don't know, right, man. I don't know.
Let me put my mask back on and we'll be all right. Yeah. Next, he says it's misleading and it lies about the product. Again, I've already explained this, that there is a mechanism within the status quo for third-party examinations in advertisement, because a third party can advertise specifically that is what they do. So that mechanism is still in place and still can persuade people who want to go out and choose products, which leads me to my next point about product differentiation and about the asymmetric information. It's still on my side. It's not on his. Because even if we look at Coke and Pepsi, and we have to have this clear and objective statement between the two, I don't know anyone who would choose any soda product ever.
Yes.
That's not that's not a net positive. I gain much utility from the sugar and carbonation, corn fructose syrup, and the plethora of other things. So if I'm looking at a magazine and it's got Coke on one side and Pepsi on the other, and I just get this list of chemical components, and I'm going, I don't want none of this. Therefore, that entire company fails. That's a net negative, because I do gain utility by drinking it. Next to that point, all products are emotional. We are emotional creatures. Everything we do has some emotional point to it, whether it's from our past experiences or whether it's from the utility that we gain. If we're gaining utility, that is an emotional experience. Therefore, emotions should be involved in how we choose. The next, so the more expensive statement, what I'm saying is that, yeah, in a grocery store, in like poorer areas, things are more expensive. That's because insurance costs are higher, because there tends to be more things being stolen. I agree. But price discrimination is about an entire advertising system, not just a small part in grocery stores. So let's look at the broad thing. If you're on the internet, there's no way I, as some random human on the other side of the internet, looking at you going, I know exactly how much that guy makes a year. So with the products being with the products that I'm looking at and that data mining, they can know that I'm probably poorer than some other person. Therefore, they're going to, one, shift my perceptions towards something that costs less. Two, they're going to look for companies that's going to give me deals. That's what the price discrimination is. Price discrimination is 3 factors. I'm not going to go into it because it's really unnecessary. But what it does is it lets a company know how much you make, how much you can buy within your budget constraint, and say, this is what we can offer you. Lastly, I want to make a point to the Apple versus Samsung, right? You say that Samsung is objectively better than Apple, but you're not looking at the utility gains, right? There is a style of product that costs more money, even if it's not better. And even under your system, you're still going to have that because the name associated with it, right? We know these products exist. We can call them royal products. They may be inferior goods, but they're going to cost more because there's something that is specific to the culture around them that makes them more expensive. No amount of advertisement is going to change that. So I don't think that you get that point. So overall, I urge everybody to remember the framework. This is subtraction from liberty are harmful to all. His liberties that are being subtracted, I can talk away. The liberties that you're losing, when we ban all of this, that's just a slippery slope straight into hell.
Okay. So I'll respond to all of those things. The first thing you say is that the things I've said are true of all advertisement. That's precisely right, which is why I'm banning all advertisement. The second thing you say is that you have the choice to consent to things. For example, you go out in public or you go on Facebook, you consent to giving away your metadata. It's true you consent to giving away your metadata. You do not consent to being told what to buy or being emotionally manipulated into what to buy at a later time, things that you potentially do not need. Joe wants to talk about liberties. Remember, advertising, the only way for it to work is to make you feel shit, so you then buy the thing, which then is supposed to make you feel better. When Joe talks about utility, that's the reason why Coke gives you utility is because its advertising campaign says that you need Coke to feel happy. It has created a deficit in utility in order to fill that deficit with its product. That is something that's unfair and does not occur on that side of the house, on my side of the house. So the important thing, utility on his side is not like above baseline utility. The advertising actively brings you down to bring you right back up to the baseline. The next thing he tells us is that things will be unbeautiful if there are no advertise. Well, sorry, yeah. Man, I think it's good that Joe's gone away. I just think the display has gotten like twice as handsome. Thoughts? For Daniel, if you're watching in the comments, he asked, isn't it communism because you're forcing companies to not differentiate? What I'm doing is, I'm just talking to Daniel in the comments. You're forcing people to not differentiate based on their advertising, but you can still differentiate based on your product. So it's really unclear how that's communism. Yeah, you're right, dude. Yeah, cool. I was just saying, you know, the display's gotten significantly more handsome after you left. I don't know. rough. All right. Okay, so I was at the claim that things become less beautiful if there's no advertising. Probably not. It'll probably become more beautiful because you're more likely to see things like nature rather than being bombarded with bright lights and colors and you need to buy this and that really deep male voice that says over the thing just buy this Axe body spray, it'll make the women fawn after you and shit like that. So that shit's less likely to occur. The next thing you tell us is that we're emotional creatures and thus we should have emotion. That's not an argument in favor of having emotive advertising, because emotive advertising is manipulating you. It's not just the quality of being emotional, it's manipulating your emotions in order to do something. That's the thing that's unjust. The next argument that Joe makes that he explicitly asks for a response to is there's still third-party advertising. And so, for example, like word of mouth. Obviously, if people are like actually making other advertisements, that's bad. But if they're doing word of mouth, that's something I cannot control. But importantly, that's significantly less of a harm under my side of the house than it is under your side of the house. If advertising is harmful, company advertising plus word of mouth on Joe's side, just word of mouth on my side. Thus, if you think advertising is bad, it's comparatively better on my side of the house. The next thing he tells you is that often you can't describe things. For example, like Coke, well, you could just say it's a very sweet drink. But, like if the thing that you're selling does not have an immediate and obvious benefit to the person who is buying it, then why should you be allowed to lie to people and tell people it makes you happy? Like think about the descriptions that Coke uses right now. It uses shit like happiness in a bottle or taste the feeling. Like, what does that mean? Like, it's just a word garbled together to make people feel like they want to buy that thing, regardless of whether or not they actually need that thing. And that's something that's pretty bad. So the next thing he tells us is that there's still going to be name association. Obviously, that name doesn't build up onto my side of the house as fast as it builds up onto yours. For example, Apple built up its name in the 80s because it was the first smartphone. And in addition to that, like, it crafted a premium product thing by slogans like, it just works or we do better, things that just don't mean anything. And even though there still will be some name association in my world, not only will it be less powerful, but the name association that builds up will only be built up purely because of the objective standards that my system imposes on them. If Samsung puts out a like Samsung S11 or whatever's the next one in line, and people buy it and people say it's excellent, that will build up a name recognition, but it'll build up a name recognition because the product is good, not because the product has a good advertising budget. Finally, I just want to reiterate all the things I said in my first speech that haven't heard a response. Firstly, that it leads to not the best product, because obviously the people who buy it are the people who advertise to the most, because it creates a tragedy of commons with regard to funding, because it locks out poorer companies and companies that are more innovative because they are unable to compete with advertising budgets. Fourthly, because it adds to a bad decision-making calculus. It forces people to buy things that they may not necessarily need. Or you have like predatory advertising, shit like, like buy it now and you get like 18 months credit free, which a lot of people, because people can't evaluate things in the long term very well, are likely to buy it without thinking about the long-term financial consequences. Secondly, stuff like it hurts families. It makes people feel shit. It makes people need to buy that thing, and then often when they buy that thing, it does not fulfill the need that the company has created for them. It puts them into situations which make them make bad choices, and it makes children fight with their parents and say to their parents, "You're a bad mother if you don't buy me this thing." That's exceptionally bad and is a massive harm. Compare the impact of those two things on my house or his side of the house. Finally, on businesses, I tell you, it keeps them accountable, because if they're going to put a statement about their product, then they're going to it has to be objective, and they're going to be held to that standard, as opposed to the aloof standard proposed by Joe, which is like if I drink some Coke and I can't taste the feeling, like, what do I say to Coca-Cola? No, I'm serious. Like, they can just make bullshit advertising campaign, claims, and then be not held accountable for it. That's better under my side of the house. I'll pass it over.
All right, so I'm going to come up from the bottom on that and say, like, when they say stuff like taste the feeling, it's not meant to be a literal interpretation. It's not a claim that they're making. They're just like, hey, guys, taste the feeling. I'm not exactly sure how that's coercive or somehow a net negative. I mean, we do that in our life. Like, bro, you got to taste this. If I cook, I'm going to be hyperbolic. I'm like, bro, you got to taste this. It's the best thing ever. Obviously, it's not the best thing ever. But I don't think speaking in hyperbole or any other like fantastical way is somehow strictly to advertising as a negative and somehow coercive. All right. So you say true to consent, told to what to buy, they feel like shit. Utility advertising, they create a deficit of utility. I don't actually believe that. So, right, let's say I'm just a guy on an island by myself. I have good food around me and I have good drink around me. And I pick up a Coca-Cola and I drink it. And it's amazing. This Coca-Cola existing did not create the deficit. And someone coming up to me and going, hey, man, I got this drink. I know you're all alone on this island, but I bet you this is the greatest drink ever. Do you want it? I don't think that somehow created a deficit if I go, no, dude, I have plenty of what I want. Right? You're assigning some force and coercion to something that could simply be explained in the same manner as two people talking to each other. So I don't agree with that. So you say that it's less beautiful. You don't want bright lights and all these colors and the man telling you to put on some swag, but we would see more nature. The number one thing advertisers use in this world to sell a product is beautiful women. And I'm sure I'm going to catch a lot of slack for this, but I am more than willing to spend the rest of my life walking around and seeing beautiful women plastered all around me than I would to see roses, bushes, and trees.
All right, but not everyone wants to see beautiful women when they walk down the street. For example, people with
bullshit.
Kids. No,
that's bullshit. You
Okay,
may not prefer it, but you still want it.
I don't think so, man. I think if I've got like, well, you've got kids, man. Do you show your kids porn? Like a lot of the women.
No.
Hear me out. A lot of the advertisements that have women in them are basically softcore porn. Like really, like would you be happy if you saw your kid like flicking through Playboy? Because that's basically what is on these advertisements.
Okay, maybe some select advertisements, but not all, right? For instance, Progressive Auto, right? Famous commercial with Flo. I find Flo to be a beautiful woman, but she's not half naked. She just wears bright lipstick, and that triggers my male sense of beauty and ripeness and of young age and sexual prowess. But that's also not, over-sexualized for a child. So I don't think that you get that. And also, if it wasn't the case that most people preferred advertising to have beautiful women, then there wouldn't be beautiful women slammed all over advertising. All right. So the third-party examination, right? I get what you're saying, but what I'm talking about is that third parties get to advertise that they test products, right? So you don't have that product testing facilitated in the same way that I do. So for me to have a consulting company, I have to advertise to these companies that I'm somehow doing something that will either benefit them or harm their competitors.
All right.
I need that advertising.
They could. You could just be like, look, I'm from Liam's Consulting, and you're Joe's Cola, and I'm gonna be like, you're allowed to like that on the catalog of stuff I spoke about at the start. You could read through. You're a company. You're looking for consulting. You look at the business to business list of services, and you say, oh, look, Liam's Consulting. His thing is like he will try to make our products more appealing by doing shit like focus groups. So you hire me, I do some focus groups, and I give you the service. Right?
How do you get to do that if you're not advertising?
No. You can still have like the catalog, like the list of services. That's not advertising. That's just information.
All right, so you're saying that there's going to be a list of catalogs of consulting companies.
Yeah, like I said at the start, like you can look up a phone book and look at like consulting companies. Yeah.
All right. So now we go back to that product differentiation. How does Liam Consulting differentiate itself from Fowler Consulting?
You say I do consulting in X industry.
Well,
or you say I do it in a certain time frame. Like you make objective statements about it. I have an X% success rate. But these things all have to be objective and verifiable. It can't be emotive in nature.
right. No, I get you. But again, we're still trying to find this level of product differentiation, right? So let's say you're Liam Consulting. You're like, well, I'll do your consulting. I'll do these focus groups in 2 weeks. I see this. I'm Fowler Consulting. To see that you've gained a profit from this, I'm like, well, I do it in 2 weeks. Now there's no differentiation. So there's this constant battle for differentiation, whereas we could simply, I'm better advertising than you. Therefore, you should come to me. It's not always the best, but that doesn't mean it's always the negative.
No. My system makes it harder to differentiate, sure, but it also makes the differentiation better. For the example that you just gave, I'll just do it in 2 weeks. Well, I'll do it in 13 days. I'll do it in 12 days. I'll do it in 1 day. Like, obviously, that gets to a point where you can't differentiate anymore. But if you can't differentiate anymore, then what's the point in lying to consumers about it through advertising?
Well, we're not talking about lying. Just because
You
like,
are.
Hold
You
on,
are.
hold on. Have you ever seen the movie American Psycho?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, you know the part where they have the business cards?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was a really good thing.
Yeah, obviously, if my business card is better than yours, then my advertising is better than yours. Therefore, that differentiates my product from yours at equilibrium.
Yeah, and you'll remember from that scene, what's his name? Patrick Bateman, the main character, is one of the most productive people in that office and has one of the shittest business cards. What does that tell you? That advertisement and your ability to buy a business card does not correlate to productivity.
He had the second best business card. He was beat out by one person who used bone, which was really cool.
And it was like indented or raised up, but like the point is just because you have more money to spend on things like advertisement doesn't mean you're a better worker. Actually, here's a better example. Someone who doesn't dress very well very often, like, I don't know, Steve Jobs, who almost never wore a suit and just wore like the same black plain stuff every day, was one of the most productive and intelligent people that we've ever seen. So, like, your appearance does not correlate to your ability to work.
Right, but obviously you have to work within some social parameters. And I, personally, if I was, sitting across from Steve Jobs, I probably wouldn't respect him as much as I would, say, Elon Musk, who does wear suits, right? Again, there has to be some.
It's ludicrous. That's so silly. Why wouldn't you respect one of the greatest innovators to exist in this century versus someone who just mooches off the government funding? Like,
oh my God, no, don't do that. Elon Musk, even if he's mooching off the government, still one of the greatest inventors of our day.
Anyway, are you serious? The Tesla cars were over 9 months late and still haven't been sent. The Hyperloop's a joke.
Yeah, but I mean, he's also doing stuff like going to bars. Like, that's pretty cool. Anyway, let me get to the point. So let's say you're an HR representative and you're sitting across from Elon Musk and from Steve Jobs. They haven't said anything to you and you don't know anything about them. You are going to be biased toward Elon Musk. One, he's had plastic surgery and he's better looking than Steve Jobs. Two, he's better dressed and more maintained. That's just a fact of reality, that you're going to be more drawn to that orderly person than you are the chaotic person. Especially if I'm trying to hire someone for a job. So that again, that's what product differentiation is. And we've spent a lot of time getting bogged down in this. All right.
Look, I would just refer you to the first argument that I made, that advertising reinforces stereotypes of the way in which people should be acting and looking. The fact that I'm biased toward Elon Musk is because of that advertising. In a world without advertising, those biases would not exist, and you're more likely to value people on their actions rather than their appearance.
No, you wouldn't, because it's a biological determinant. Some people want more orderliness and higher conscientiousness, especially if you're trying to get someone to work for you. Anyway,
Yeah, and
I had a
me too,
I had a
man.
blast. Got 19 seconds, so I'm going to point out why everybody should think that I win, and this is why I think that I win, because obviously my world has a better proposition than his does, because his reduces freedom in the overall. The freedoms that you lose for yours are actually consented to. Therefore, you should vote for me
Put
and
the
negate the
mask
resolution.
on.
No.